It's starting. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of Edit Art Talks. We're coming to you from Gallery Edit in Richmond, Virginia. This is our gallery here. And we are two missions organizations, World Horizons and Hillside Missions, both international missions organizations who are working to make disciples in places around the world where there's currently limited or no access to Christian community. So our art gallery is one of the ways that we are using here and soon to be using in India, just actually about 1 month from today, which a bunch of us are going, so we're really excited. And we wanted to start this series of like art education talks to get better at this idea of art as mission ourselves, and we want to make it a conversation, so we're inviting anybody else to participate who wants to. We're still figuring a lot out. We have questions, and we want to talk about them with you. We want to know, how can art galleries reach people for Christ? And what does art have to do with our modern day Christianity? And how do those things intersect in a way that doesn't always result in cheesy pictures of Jesus with doves? So, without further ado, turn it over to Ginny, who will kick us off with some questions and an introduction about the essays that we're using for this particular episode.
So a lot of us read Art in the Bible by Frances Schaeffer. So we're going to be discussing sort of what was in that text and then sort of just start a conversation about art and Jesus and all of that. You're welcome to chat with us over on the right side of your screen. You probably see a little chat box. If you have a question directed at us, you're welcome to discuss amongst yourselves on there. But if you have a question for us, type in all caps the word question and then colon and then just say what your question is for us, and we can discuss it live here together too. So let's start. So in the reading, we found that like oftentimes Christians are focused on like sharing and discovering truth, like evangelizing and stuff like that. So one of the questions that Schaeffer posed was, do Christians need to engage in beauty as well as truth? So what do you guys think? Like, how important is that?
I think it's very important because just looking at the world around us, it's clear that God values beauty. We can taste the difference between an apple and a pear. We can see thousands of different colors. We love music and we can feel so many different things. So to not appreciate the beauty that God has put in the world and that God has enabled us to create, I think, is taking something very valuable for granted. So beauty is a reality just as much as truth is a reality for us.
Another thing is, another point Schaeffer makes is how God's creativity, like he instilled within us creativity, like as he created the human race, he gave us some creativity as well. So for a lot of the secular world art, like explain the secular view of art in that context. I mean, I know everyone can appreciate beauty, but like, I don't know, what do y'all think about that? Like Christ or Jesus, I mean God. Like God's instilling creativity in us. Like, I don't know. What do y'all think about that?
Like the world, like how the world views beauty versus like how the Lord like designed and like instilled beauty. I think one thing that is oftentimes pretty dominant with like difference between those two is that they're like the world a lot of times like beauty, like people create where they try and take something and make it be beautiful for like the sake of like selfishness or just like to be able to get something. Like it constantly goes back to you where it's like, how can I feel something from this, or like how is this pleasing to me, or like, you know, there's very selfish ambition, not always, but I think that's a pretty dominant thing, and I think that's the difference, like between how the Lord wants us to create things that are beautiful, or think about beauty, like it's supposed to be something that reflects Him and like is honoring and like pure and good, and so I think that's like something that is often splits it up.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely driven by like purpose behind why you're making, because like, you know, a non-Christian made just a beautiful art. It's sort of like the driving force behind it. Like, really beautiful art, but like sort of a Christian artist kind of has that sort of extra drive to sort of make something that pleases the Lord, as opposed to just everyone else around you.
On page 66, if you're following within the Schaeffer essay, he addresses this idea of worldview and how every piece of art, like regardless if it's a secular or coming from a Christian artist, is going to show a worldview. And he says, even those works which are constructed under the principle of art for art's sake often imply a worldview. Even the worldview that there is no meaning is a message. So even the, I don't know, like the sloppy art or art that's presented as like just there, just to be art, like that still says something, but it doesn't mean that it's saying something that's great or hopeful.
Schaeffer does go through and explain, like, there's 3 different reasons why artists make, and that was one of them. One is art for art's sake, so it doesn't say anything, you can't say anything about it, it's just sort of there to be there. The second one is art is only an embodiment of a message, so really, really conceptual, purely for its meaning. It kind of reduces it to an intellectual statement. And then there's, like, the artist will make a body of art, or at least just a piece that shows his worldview, that kind of combines those 2 things and says, like, 1, what is he making? 2, like, why is he making it? And 3, like, what do people feel after looking at it? Do y'all find that's true? Like, are there any other like, reasons artists make? A lot of us in the room are artists, including one.
Yeah, I can agree.
Yeah.
I personally make art. I think that is it's been a means of communication, and as I've like grown, then that like as I've grown, not actually like physically and like mentally, but specifically like spiritually in my walk with like Christ, then that like means of communication has been more defined like towards my faith. And yeah, I make art because I need to recognize these good things in my life, and the way that I recognize these good things, these things that like God has given me, then I do it through art.
I think for me, it's sort of like easier to show people like a piece of my art that I've like had faith inspired, and like talked to them about it. I don't know, like having art sort of embody my feelings and where I'm at with my walk with Christ, and where I want like other people to see where I'm at, sort of thing. Like that piece is a documentation of that, and it's almost easier to evoke an emotion from a viewer through that than to sit there and try to like convey through words, which I'm really than to just like show them a piece of work and have a feeling, because that's what art, like that's really a cool thing about art, because you like we're all very visual people, so looking at it, having this like visceral reaction is just a lot easier than like, let me tell you about Jesus, like let's sit down and chat, because sometimes that's a really good starting space to begin a conversation. So that's why I'm really excited for India and all of the other like art galleries that are popping up. And that's why I'm excited for what we do here, because it kind of gives you a starting point. Like, oh, you like this work? Well, let me tell you what it means, or something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody else? Any other artists who talk about why they make?
I mean, apart from making art purely to like communicate subjects of faith, I mean, I don't always make art about my faith. I don't make art with that subject matter. I could make art to convey like a purely secular opinion on an issue. Well, I, of course, like my opinions are influenced by my faith, but like if I wanted to make an editorial illustration for a current event, where faith comes into that would be my motivation for good craftsmanship and also like who I'm seeking to glorify by working. Because I've realized throughout school and through creating different things that like it's not worth it and it's not glorifying to God if I'm creating with the goal to glorify myself and to feel good about the skills that I have. So no matter the topic of the art, God still plays a role because God is the motivation to do quality work. And yeah, I want how hard I work to glorify God, not my own ego.
You touched on craftsmanship. Schaeffer goes in and kind of explains 4 different ways to like look at art, like to judge whether or not art is like good, which is super, like it's really hard to define that, but he breaks it down into technical excellence. So like we can stop there. What value does technical excellence have in an art piece, would you guys say? Because I know for me, like I'm not attracted to
sloppy work.
Sloppy work. Yeah. I don't know how else to say it, because it's like if it's some like again viscerally like first impression, if something is like beautifully crafted or beautifully made, I'm more willing to engage with it. Same kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's like, I don't know, there's a certain level of respect that you already have for like the artist because of their like good craftsmanship. And it's like, I feel entitled to like really consider the piece then. Because you see that they put work into this and they've been like honing these skills, and it's like, yes, I'm going to actually like consider this and it makes me want to understand it more.
And there's something to be said for like sloppy work that's purposely sloppy.
Yeah.
Like if it's like a classmate, I want to understand that they know how to do it like right, like a correct technical skill, like way you're supposed to do it. But like to then deconstruct that, that's what I appreciate sloppiness more. Yeah. But when it's like you don't know how to do it, like I don't know, that's when it gets tricky for me. But definitely just an opinion. But then that's the second point Schaeffer makes is, so there's technical excellence and then validity, whether an artist is honest to his worldview or creates just to make money. So that's something else that people need to consider when looking at art. Another thing is that worldview, that intellectual content. So as Christians, whether you're making Christian art or not, like whether or not faith was the inspiring factor, as a Christian artist, your art is ultimately kind of judged through the eyes of Scripture, I guess, according to Schaeffer. So if something immoral is stated in good art, it's more potent and dangerous. So like, if it's not, like, okay, throw aside the Christian artist thing. If anyone makes something, like makes it well, and it has an immoral message, like people eat it up, like that's when it's really dangerous. Yeah. Because nowadays, the greater the art, the less we often judge its worldview. Because I've had like, so and so made that, like they're worldview artists, like this work, it must be great, and then you like look at it and it's about something awful, and you're confused. So Schaeffer says there's 4 types of makers. There's Christian, and then there's non-Christian influenced by the Christian consensus. Because there are, artists who make works about Christians who are Christians. And then, it's just 3, sorry. So Christian, non-Christian influenced by, Christian faith, and then Christians who don't understand the view. that Christians have. And then the fourth thing that he says to judge art on, so we have technical excellence, validity, intellectual content, and then the integration of content and vehicle. So how they apply a concept to the physical like object or painting or drawing or video or dance. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I really appreciate the last point because I view that as tying in with craftsmanship, because a lot of times I'll hear people talk about a piece that personally I really value good craftsmanship, and they'll say, oh no, but this is what it's saying. So because of the concept, it doesn't matter what it looks like. But if the medium that you choose doesn't add to the content, why would you even make it?
Yeah,
because if the viewer, if the medium can't communicate to the viewer your content, then you failed. I feel like, no matter how good your concept is.
Yeah.
And same vice versa. Like, if you make something beautiful and no one can discern the message, then
It makes me think of like just what good presentation of food does for like an eating experience. Like, no matter how good the food might be, if it looks gross on the plate, I mean this is sort of a cheesy example, so forgive me, but like you're not really gonna want to try it. You're not gonna enjoy the experience as much anyway, right? It's like beautiful food that tastes good too.
yeah.
Ginny deserted us for a second, so let's see where we are. Great, so finishing up Schaeffer's 4 criteria for judgment of art. There's a lot in there. Does anyone want to comment on those things before we go on?
I think the suggestion that there are a set of criteria by which a person could or should judge others is a pretty controversial idea. How you define beauty is not universal. And what food looks good on my plate indeed is not the same for what looks good for a tribal person in East Asia. And the presentation and the content of the plate speak very different things. And so those things aren't universally applicable.
Yeah.
But I think the standards, those 4 items, those 4 criteria that Schaeffer suggests are valuable because they can be universally applied in different cultural contexts or different contexts, different historical contexts, and still be true.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I would still struggle with in his book is the idea that because if he stands by these 4, it means that art that is purely abstract is judged poorly or has little value. And he suggests that art that is purely abstract doesn't have as much value, or any value, I don't know, but doesn't have the value that art that has discernible meaning has. And I was hoping to hear a little conversation about that. I see art that is purely abstract, and I can still be, particularly if the artist has told me what emotion might be meant to be portrayed. I think especially there, the lens by which the author intended it to be viewed matters. I don't like the idea of, well, you just tell me what you get out of it. I find it illogical. It's difficult for me to even appreciate the art that way. But if someone says, this is what I meant for it to say, then I can look at it and say, I feel like maybe I can connect with you in this message now, even if it's purely abstract.
Rather than just choose your own adventure art.
Right.
Which it seems kind of like sometimes younger artists like start out that way. It almost seems like it's just part of the rite of passage in becoming a good artist, or it could be that maybe in the beginning when your work is like less conceptual, you might be happy to have different interpretations. But I mean, I agree that that's frustrating.
Yeah, it's not
Shouldn't be the goal.
Yeah.
As far as what he says about abstract art, I did take note of that because I did disagree with it. He says there's a distinct limitation to totally abstract art. Like prose or poetry, which has no contact with normal syntax and the normal definitions of words, it is a quarry out of which the observer or the hearer has personal emotional response. So it seems like he's saying that abstract art relies on the individual response and can't really connect you to a unified message, which I don't agree with. Like, even if you think about a line, if you like draw a jagged line on paper and then you draw a nice like smooth wavy line, the first line communicates aggression and the second line would communicate something more peaceful or fluid, and there's absolutely no representation in those lines. And so I think it's very possible that abstract art can have meaning and value, because if you think about it, like graphic design is completely abstract if you're not using pictures. I mean, you could argue that there's meaning in the words, but from a zoomed out perspective on like a magazine layout, you can tell what looks good, what looks bad, what looks solid, what looks off balance and sort of energetic without actually reading it. And then the Jubilee exhibit that was at the BMFA a while ago, that's abstract. It doesn't like, some of them might have looked like plants or flowers, but the majority of it was abstract and people loved it. And it was beautiful.
So what was it about it that you think like appealed to people? Because that was a really popular and like abstract exhibit.
I think the medium, for one, appealed to people because you don't always, I don't know if I've ever seen such a large exhibit of glass, and there's technical skill evident even though it is abstract because there's very large pieces, and I think just being in an environment with the art really captured people and like the colors and beauty that were present.
And I think that's as much, I mean, again, you have to just kind of talk to the artist in that situation, but the intent that vehicle like portrayed was sort of speedy. Like, you know, the fish looked like fish, like it's like a fish. Like you weren't supposed to like feel much by looking at it, but except for like, you know, I wondered like how glass can look like that. But there's something to be said for like art for beauty's sake too. That's certainly valid. So let's see. I guess maybe we could talk about like art in the church. Like how often I don't know, I sometimes, you know, get the impression that we've fallen away. Because I remember like, you know, I remember the Renaissance.
The good old days.
But like Renaissance art, like church art was like huge. But nowadays you kind of get the sense that like, you know, art doesn't have a place in the church. But I don't know, what do y'all think about that? Or do you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like, I mean, Renaissance and like, I guess just the time period and like the culture, then what was considered high art and like good art was religious art for the most part. And yeah, so I mean, that's what artists at the time were producing, and that was the only like thing acceptable. I think that now, as far as Christian art, it's very extremely limited. And most of the ways, I mean, the first thing that I think of, I mean, besides our gallery here, when I think of like Christian art, then I think of, you know, like little blurbs on like Facebook, like with a quick verse, and like it's like with a pretty like photo, or like, I mean, pillows with verses on them, and like very, very short, quick, like Jesus, and that's,
I think the church is okay with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Like sort of this loose interpret, because like as a, you know, Christian maker, like I'm not drawn to that, so I want to make something in an not position, but like to go steer away from that. So something steer away from that. In the church sometimes.
I think the church doesn't even know how to ask for art, or like they don't really understand like where it needs to like be in their lives almost. Like maybe because like people aren't okay with just like enjoying things for the sake of enjoyment. Like that's like a new like concept to myself, which like has opened up a lot of like I don't know, like it justifies like liking things because the Lord has made it and because it's good and because of what it is. And I think like that's something that's important to like introduce to to continue to introduce to people, because I don't think that's something people understand or really think about like that. They might have never understood it, which kind of is like, oh, okay, so like that's a way that opens up the asking for art in that way, and it is kind of more of an abstract like idea. So that's where I think abstract art and any kind of art can come in and play a big part.
Yeah, like appreciating that beauty right there. Like Schaeffer said, the lordship of Christ over the whole of life means that there are no platonic areas in Christianity, no dichotomy or hierarchy between the body and the soul. So God made the body as well as the soul, and redemption is for the whole man. So that kind of like validates the appreciation of beauty.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I just think it'd be so cool if like pastors and like different people on staff in churches were like, hey, you know what, like, why don't we get a really nice quality like piece of art up on the wall that someone went to school for and like did a lot of time and effort on, because like we would like to look at that instead of like a picture of trees or like
nailed to the cross.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of history behind that.
Yeah.
As far as like, I don't know, I see a starkness in a lot of Protestant churches, and like there are like origins for that, because during the Protestant Reformation, like the art was very Baroque, and so it was just very like everything was very intense. It was like a lot of gold and very gilded and stuff, and that was sort of Protestants sort of associated that with the abuses in the Catholic Church, and like the decadence of a lot of the popes during that time. Like it was a huge problem. So as a reaction, like Protestant churches, early Protestant churches in Europe, they're completely stark. They're white, because people were seeing like these icons, all these paintings, all these like ornate churches, like they're seeing it as idolatry. So like these Protestant churches, and like you can still see that today. Like it's not to the same level because people aren't like, oh, idolatry, but like it's had its effect. Because you walk into any modern like evangelical church building and there's like not a whole lot going on as far as decoration.
Yeah, it's because wanting to get away from this like idolatry and like trying to make an extreme difference. And I think now like we're just coming back down from that.
Right.
There's like a shift to focus on the soul.
Yes, and the individual, like reading of scripture, like out in worship.
Yeah, don't get distracted by that kind of stuff. This is like comparing, kind of talking about Schaeffer's work, and so often we focus solely on the soul. Schaeffer very clearly presents the fact that Christianity involves the whole man, including his intellect and creativeness. There are no side areas; these are central areas. The arts and the sciences have a central place in the Christian life. He's also clear to point out the fact that any artist, painter, sculptor, writer, musician makes a body of work that clearly reflects and displays his or her worldview. So like that's okay to do that. Like we said, it's almost worship for us. Like I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to see the shift over the years of how the church interacts with that.
Also, I would say that like a worldview is not just how you view religion. And so if your art is going to encompass your worldview, it can't just be Jesus with doves, because you have a lot more opinions than just Jesus, because like he's going to
influence your decisions and your opinions, but you have a lot more opinions.
Given that we're here in a mission organization talking about this because we are convinced, we believe that reason and logic, the evidence leads us to conclude that Christ is right. Not only right, but the only right way. There's no question in our mind. That's why we're here. And the only reason we have an art gallery, the only reason we have an art conversation is because we want to see people understand Christ in the way that we do, know God through Jesus in the way that we do, in a saving way, in the way that we do. And so I think that, as we think about art in the church, well, two things. One, I think we should be careful. We've probably lost all of the dove painters at this point, but I think it's important to point out that the reason that art is produced is because it is appreciated, and so we shouldn't pan those who appreciate that. It is appreciated, and so it is produced. And there are, though, probably true that as culture changes, the appreciation and the form of art changes. But what I'd like to hear is more just a little bit about what it is that we think and how it is that we think art can accomplish what we're talking about in mission. We as an organization, as two organizations come together, World Horizons and Hillside, have decided that we should pursue art as mission, a way to communicate the truth of the gospel, which we believe is man's greatest need, greater than any other need, much greater than hearing any opinion or otherwise, is the fact that we believe God is real, and Christ is the only way to commune with Him. So if that's true, how is art going to help us accomplish that?
Well, I'm getting excited for the India trip we're going on to start another gallery edit like this in Lucknow. And I'm not going to need a translator when I talk to somebody about this piece that I brought to India from here, like as a way to kind of talk to them about it. Which I think is kind of true, because it transcends language, especially if you're taking worldwide.
Yeah, I think that.
Does it? So what if the artist thinks that you painted that because you love Satan, or the goddess of the harvest? Does it matter somewhat? So Schaeffer makes, I think, the point that it matters, that the content, the content, in order for it to be valid.
Right.
So I think that's a good conversation.
Yeah,
because I think that's often thought. I can preach the gospel and sometimes use words, and I think that's a crappy idea. I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think words are absolutely necessary. I'd love to hear it.
I think that is
Well, that's a good point.
but yes, words are necessary. But I know that art does people are drawn to art.
It's a catalyst more so.
Yes, it's a catalyst. It's not the end result. It's not oh, I'm just gonna put this artwork up and
brought to Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that if I have a piece on the wall, then it's so interesting to see just so many people it breaks down oh, you made this, and then they're just immediately interested in it. It's
Schaeffer in his book, page 24 and 74 and 75, talks about three issues that we have to consider how Christian art has to be seen. And he speaks about first, Christian art today should be a 20th century art. This is the first thing. The second thing is Christian art should be different from country to country. And he speaks with the issue of Christian art is Japanese, his painting should be Japanese, if Indian. And the third issue he presenting is the body of the Christian artist work should be reflect the Christian worldview. So we are doing mission and we are using art. So how his thought can help us to define what we are about.
Cassandra, could you reiterate the points? Because I don't know if everybody can hear it.
Yeah, so first, this is before, like, actually the 21st century. So he says Christian art today should be 20th century art. What he means is it should be current art changes. We shouldn't cling to past styles just for the sake of, like, revering a certain way of doing things. Second, Christian art should differ from country to country. He gives the example, why did we ever force the Africans to use Gothic architecture? And like Carlos said, if a Christian artist is Japanese, his painting should be Japanese. And then third, the body of a Christian artist's work should reflect the Christian worldview.
So what do you think about that?
I think you had a good point that art is a catalyst, and art allows a connection with society that can provoke relationships and discussions that could lead people to believe in Jesus. I also think that as far as relating to worldview, the body of work, if it's in the right cultural context, will communicate a worldview that could be radically different from what people are used to if they're not Christians. And I also think that simply creating quality work, and if people know you're Christian, it communicates an aspect of God that we sometimes forget, that God is a creator, that God appreciates beautiful things and puts value in beauty, and that God has made us in his image, therefore we are creators, whether you can draw or not.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Dorothy, but this is Dorothy. She's the artist of all the art that's currently up at Edit. And we just had the opening. A lot of us were here interacting with guests, but did you kind of see anything in the way people interacted with your art at all? If that's okay.
No, it was really cool to be able to talk to some of the people who came in, especially people reading my artist statement.
There's the words.
Yeah, exactly. I honestly, like, I use a lot of different media, like I paint and I draw, but I actually prefer writing to all of those. So I was really proud of my artist statement. But it was just interesting talking to people about sort of what they thought about it. And I had somebody say that, like, once they read the artist statement, like, my work kind of made more sense to them. So I don't know, I definitely think that words are really important as far as art goes. Especially sort of the way that I create, without an explanation, it's a little more ambiguous. Just sort of, I like to capture moments rather than overarching ideas. So, I don't know, like that was kind of, it was interesting talking to people just about my work and like why I make it.
And Judy makes a good draw there. I think it would make sense to even maybe hear some of it, but the point of the artist statement, we were in a Christian art gallery. Our art gallery has a different mission here. We're interested in introducing people to Christ, inviting people to follow Jesus. That's why we have an art gallery. And so, as Judy points out rightly, and Dorothy mentioned, our art gallery begins here with a statement from the artist that describes how their art is produced as worship. And that then gives you the lens through which to look at the rest of the art. So in India, we will do the same. The artists will produce art, but we will provide some connection in conversation, in word, whether the art is produced by a Christian artist or not. In India, maybe it won't be. But we will have the opportunity with statement, with words, to say, here's how I find this to be important or valid. But particularly here, I think, and Schaeffer would conclude, the art has a more powerful message because we understand what the artist meant to convey. And because, as Schaeffer would point out, it's valid because it glorifies God intentionally. And that gets me excited about art.
I have a question. We haven't touched on it yet, but briefly, do we want to go over a couple examples in the Bible of art related to God? Because I found that pretty thoughtful. Do you guys want to share one, or I can start off with one?
Why don't you start?
Okay. Well, Schaeffer mentions the construction of the temple, and the Jewish temple involved a huge amount of art, and it involved craftsmanship from like almost every medium. There's metalworking, sculpture, textiles, and God commands that these tools that will be used in the temple, like lampstands and bowls, he commands that they be made beautifully, that the lampstands look like flowers, and there's no need for that. There's no like utilitarian purpose behind a lamp looking like flowers, but I think it's just very powerful that God thought it was good, so he wanted that to look like flowers.
Pages and pages of the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, he simply wanted it because he liked it. That was reasonable.
So cool.
I think that also is important because it talks about how like specific the Lord like wanted things to look, and like also that, I mean, it's obvious that he's a creator and like he has put so much like detail into like how he created us in the world and like biologically, but also just like that's an example of like how we like as artists should be living, and like how important like our education and like thought like is not to be just like idle, especially like if like we see if there are so many pages of like the Lord like instructing artists to work hard, like that is what that is saying, and in that specific passage it's for like something to preserve himself in. But if we're a Christian and we're making art and it is to like further the gospel, then like we are also doing the same thing, and so like it's very specific, and I think that's like brings a lot of peace to like how we're supposed to be thinking about art. And like, I don't know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And there's also not just visual art in the Bible. I mean, there's the whole book of Psalms. God values music. God values words as well as visual art. Most of us are visual artists, so that's probably why we've been mostly talking about it from the standpoint of visual art.
Does anyone else have like parts from like the reading that really stood out to you as well?
Just like going back to what we're talking about, you know, what makes art Christian. I liked a little chunk of his essay on page 92. I'll just read it. He says, religious subjects are no guarantee that a work of art is Christian. On the other hand, the art of an artist who never paints the head of Christ, never once paints an open tomb, may be magnificent Christian art. For some artists, there is a place for religious themes, but an artist does not need to be conscience-stricken if he does not paint in this area. Some Christian artists will never use religious themes. There's a freedom the artist has in Christ under the leadership of the Holy Spirit. So I don't think that he's saying that Christian art shouldn't portray religious subjects or really straightforward. I mean, there's so much good art that is being produced and really recognizable characters and symbols and Christian ideas. But I just appreciated his thought on that.
I had a passage that I actually like will often quote in like my artist statement that I did when I had a show here too. He talks about creativity. I don't know, it's just really inspiring. So an artwork has value as a creation because man is made in the image of God. And therefore, man not only can love and think and feel emotion, but he has the capacity to create. Being in the image of the Creator, we are called upon to have creativity. In fact, it is part of the image of God to be creative. So I don't know, I just kind of use that as motivation almost, just to keep making, because it's what I'm made to do.
And like, what about the idea of, making art and creating, even when we don't feel necessarily creative or inspired? Because I think that's another kind of cliche in art world, and maybe you guys know better because you've like been to art school, but like oh, I'm just, like I'm not feeling it, or I'm like waiting for inspiration to hit me. But if we're like viewing it as our like craft or our trade or our work, it's sort of not as glamorous, right? But
yeah, like I could totally not be into an assignment for a class, but like I've gone through the whole process and not loving it, or not being like not even addressing like a faith theme in it, and at the end of the day you're like, this, I still like produced something, and like the end product I am proud of, like so there's still a little bit of that.
Yeah.
You don't have to love it.
I think that like, that applies to like our life in general. Like, you can't base all of your decisions off of your emotions, and like there are so many times where I don't feel like making artwork, but I know that like I need to, and so that's where discipline comes into play, and your work is going to be so much more fruitful if it's not just based on emotion. I'm making
And when you think about it, like if somebody's playing a sport, they're gonna practice every day. Like I try to draw every day, even if I feel like it, because like in the end, I'm better for it. And it's not necessarily like things that I'll show people. Yeah. But like, it's a discipline.
Anything that stuck out to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that this really stuck out to me. I forgot what page it is, so I apologize. I know that it was after the passage about like David. So around 37, 38 pages. But anyway, after that, it goes, I'm just going to do this. Trumpets, cymbals, psalteries, harps, all the various instruments of David, music upon music, art upon art, all pouring forth, all pointing up the possibility of creativity and praise of God, all carried to a high order of art at God's command. And when you begin to understand this sort of thing, suddenly you can begin to breathe, and all the terrible pressure that has been put on us by making art something less than spiritual suddenly begins to disappear. And with this truth comes beauty, and with this beauty, a freedom before God. It's just something that, it's just one of my favorite passages. Yeah.
If we time it one more little chunk.
Yeah, and then I have like a closer passage.
Okay. Schaeffer, we touched on this a little bit earlier. He talks about how art changes. So this is page 74. He says, styles of art form change, and there's nothing wrong with this. And then later he says, as a matter of fact, change is one difference between life and death. As long as one has a living art, its forms will change. The past art forms, therefore, are not necessarily the right ones for today or tomorrow. To demand the art forms of yesterday in either word systems or art is a bourgeoisie failure. Is that how you say that? I don't know how you say that. Okay, well, I appreciate that because I think it is important to realize, in an age where technology develops very fast, that you glorify God through doing something in Photoshop just as much as an oil painting. There is nothing less glorifying about good graphic design than a symphony if it is well crafted and made for the glory of God.
got the explanation.
Yeah, technology does not devalue art. It does not displease God. Technology is not a thing.
Go ahead.
Maybe Tinder. Just
Anyway.
kidding, kind of.
Does anybody have any other like final thoughts? Okay. So no work of art is more important than the Christian's own life, and every Christian is carried upon to be an artist in that sense. He may have no gift of writing, no gift of composing or singing, but each man has the gift of creativity in terms of the way he lives his life. In this sense, the Christian's life is to be in artwork. The Christian's life is to be a thing of truth and also a thing of beauty in the midst of the lost and despairing world. So, you know, you don't have to be an artist, or even if you are, like, just the way you live your life is, you know, why God gave you creativity, to be just a person that glorifies Him through the way you do everything, whether it's art or otherwise. I don't know. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any further questions or comments, you can reach us through somewhere.
Twitter,
Facebook. Yes. So go like all of those things and retweet everything, and share this video with people. And we will be back soon with another Edit Art Talk.
And if you could maybe suggest to the artists are watching, we're always happy to have submissions for the galleries to art.
Yeah.
Yes, we need submissions for artwork for Edit Gallery here in Richmond. So do that.
You can find the submission page at the website reachthenations.org/art.
Cool. Thank you guys. Bye.